The skyline of New Alexandria shimmered under the pale turquoise glow of twin moons. Towering spires of metal and glass stretched skyward, crisscrossed with translucent skyways, where lev cars whisked elegantly between floating platforms. The city, alive with the hum of advanced technology and whispered rumors of political intrigue, seemed calm, almost ordinary, but that serenity shattered the moment Helen descended. Her ship was unlike any human design. Sleek, iridescent, and organic in appearance, it drifted silently above the central plaza before lowering with a grace that defied gravity. The public had been warned. An alien diplomat of unmatched beauty was coming, but nothing could prepare them for the first sight of Helen. She emerged with poise and confidence, her presence commanding yet effortless. Crimson hair fell in cascading waves down her back, shimmering with subtle metallic strands that caught the light. Her piercing green eyes, luminous even under the city's artificial lights, scanned the crowd with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. People gasped, their hearts leaping, not just for her beauty, but for the aura of authority she exuded. Security drones hovered discreetly around her, yet Helen's gaze alone seemed enough to command silence. Citizens and journalists alike froze, phones hovering mid-air, as if time itself paused to acknowledge her. Whispers rippled through the crowd. She's not human, and yet she's perfect. Among those watching were two individuals whose lives would become inextricably linked with hers. Damian Cross, a sharp-featured political figure known for his ruthlessness and control over elite circles, frowned as he observed Helen. His instincts, both professional and personal, warned him that this arrival would disrupt everything he, Hel, had meticulously built. He felt a dangerous, almost infuriating pull toward her, and he hated it. Nearby, Leora Valen, a brilliant scientist whose innovations had shaped much of the city's technology, studied Helen with keen analytical eyes. She noted the subtle alien nuances, the micro-patterns in Helen's iridescent skin, the almost imperceptible way her hair reacted to ambient light. Fascinated, Leora wondered, was Helen a threat or a revelation? Helen took her first steps. Onto the plaza, her movements fluid, precise, and impossibly elegant. The ground seemed to respond to her presence. The drones adjusted their positions without command, and the crowd instinctively parted, creating a path that led directly to the platform where the city's officials awaited. She smiled, a slight, knowing curve of her lips, and it was as though the world itself leaned in to listen. Helen spoke, her voice melodic yet authoritative, amplified just enough by the subtle tech embedded in her garments. People of New Alexandria, I come in curiosity and in respect. Let us discover what we may learn from one another. A ripple of awe and disbelief washed over the citizens. Some bowed instinctively, others whispered fervent admiration. But Helen's gaze swept the crowd. With intent, lingering momentarily on Damian and Leora, a spark of intrigue igniting in her eyes. She had arrived, but this was only the beginning. The games of influence, attraction, and subtle warfare were about to begin, and Helen intended to play them better than anyone ever could. The grand hall of New Alexandria's Central Council glimmered with a sophistication only a civilization 3 millennia beyond the 21st century could achieve. Walls of translucent alloy shifted in color with the light, projecting the cityscape beyond in a constant, living panorama. Hovering platforms held guests, each adorned in the latest fashions that blurred the lines between fabric and technology. And at the center of it all, Helen moved like a figure out of legend. Her crimson hair was pulled into an intricate braid that fell over one shoulder, accented with metallic threads that shimmered like liquid fire. Her green eyes, sharp yet inviting, scanned the room with quiet calculation. Every gesture, every slight tilt of her head, every measured step was deliberate. She was the queen of elegance and strategy, an alien among humans, and yet she moved as though she had belonged to this world her entire life. Damian Cross stood near the entrance, his expression a mixture of suspicion and fascination. His tailored suit was immaculate, his posture perfectly composed, but there was a tension in his shoulders, a slight narrowing of his eyes, betraying his awareness. This was no ordinary visitor. He had seen many dignitaries in his lifetime, many, politicians, influencers, and even foreign royalty. But Helen, she was something else entirely. Her presence stirred a cocktail of intrigue and irritation within him. He wanted to control the situation, but already he sensed he could not. Leora Valen, standing across the hall, had a different perspective. Her brilliant mind dissected Helen's appearance and demeanor with meticulous precision. She noted the subtle patterns in her skin, the way her eyes reflected light differently than any human's, and the faint hum of energy surrounding her. But it wasn't just the alien physiology that captured her attention. It was the confidence and quiet command of the room. Helen didn't need to speak to be noticed. The room itself seemed to bend toward her. A murmur passed through the assembled elite as Helen approached the council dais. A few whispered words, like sparks of curiosity, ignited around the room. Is she royalty? Her beauty, it's almost hypnotic. I can't look away. Helen smiled softly, acknowledging the unspoken attention, with a subtle nod that hinted both warmth and calculated control. The council's chairwoman, a woman with an air of icy authority, rose to greet her. Helen, she said, her voice steady but betraying a hint of nervousness, we are honored by your presence. New Alexandria hopes to learn from your civilization. Helen inclined her head gracefully. And I from yours, she replied, her voice melodic yet precise. Understanding is a beginning. Cooperation, a choice. But influence is earned. Her words, casual yet commanding, sent a subtle shiver through the room. It was during these first conversations that subtle tensions emerged. Minor dispute over protocol sparked a minor ripple among the human elites, and Helen seized it with quiet efficiency. With a gentle correction, a slight smile, and an almost imperceptible gesture, she reoriented the hierarchy without confrontation. Every glance, every measured word, left the impression that she was both unassailable and approachable, a master of human perception. Damian's gaze never left her, sharp and calculating. Leora's eyes, equally attentive, traced every movement, analyzing, learning, calculating the patterns that might one day help or challenge them. Helen had arrived on Earth, and in mere hours she had already begun reshaping the dynamics of power, fascination, and desire. By the end of the evening, she had secured her first victories without a single overt move. A quiet understanding settled. In the room, Helen was not merely a visitor, she was a force, and the games had only just begun. And somewhere deep in her emerald eyes, a spark of amusement glimmered. She had arrived to observe, but already she was planning. The night air of New Alexandria was electric, charged not just by technology, but by anticipation. Hovering lanterns glowed in soft purples and blues, casting a surreal, ethereal light over the city's central promenade. The elite had gathered. Again, this time for a social gala designed to honor visiting dignitaries. But as soon as Helen arrived, it became immediately clear that this event belonged to her. Helen moved through the crowd with an effortless grace that seemed almost supernatural. Every gesture was calculated, yet entirely natural. The tilt of her head, the flash of her emerald eyes, the subtle smile that hinted at knowledge only she possessed. Conversations paused as she passed. Whispers followed her trail, a symphony of curiosity and envy. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic, drawing attention without even trying. Damian Cross observed from across the hall, leaning against a polished column. His arms were crossed, but the tension in his jaw betrayed him. He had been through countless political and social events, but he had never encountered anyone like Helen. She was not just an alien. She was an enigma wrapped in elegance, and, frustratingly, he could not tear his eyes away. Every subtle interaction she initiated with other guests felt like a calculated move in a chess game, one he was determined, and yet perhaps powerless, to match. Leora Valen hovered near the balcony, scanning Helen with a mixture of fascination and professional curiosity. She noted how Helen's posture subtly influenced those around her. A casual hand extended, a polite nod here or a slight laugh there. It shifted entire conversations in her favor. Leora understood the mechanics of influence, and she recognized mastery when she saw it. She also recognized the danger. Helen's charm was a weapon, and every human and alien in the room was already under its sway. Helen's first encounter was with a minor council member, a man boasting a wealth of influence and self-importance. He attempted to dominate the conversation, speaking in clipped, patronizing tones. Helen smiled, a subtle curl of her lips that seemed innocent, yet carried undeniable authority. She responded with a single sentence phrased with precision, "Your accomplishments are impressive, yet influence is measured by impact, not titles." The room seemed to pause, the council member blinking in surprise as Helen's words subtly undermined his self-assurance without confrontation. Damien's brows furrowed. This was more than charm. This was strategy, practiced and refined. Helen drifted next to a cluster of socialites, her conversation light, teasing, yet layered with subtle insight. Into each guest's motives, she discovered allegiances, rivalries, and secrets without anyone realizing she was probing. And through it all, she kept her eyes on Damien and Leora, measuring reactions, learning patterns, and quietly testing loyalties. As the gala continued, Helen's influence began to ripple outward. A small argument between two influential figures was diffused merely by her smile and a quiet word. Rumors that might have escalated into scandal were nipped in the bud. People left conversations feeling charmed, impressed, and subtly indebted, though none could articulate exactly why. By the night's end, Helen had not only established herself as a figure of fascination and authority, but she had also begun weaving the threads of control and strategy that would underpin every future interaction. She had arrived as a guest, but when she left the promenade, it was clear. She had already begun reshaping the social and political landscape of New Alexandria, and in the quiet moments when she allowed herself to breathe, she caught Damien's eye across the crowd. A spark of challenge passed between them, unspoken but understood. The game had begun. The sun, or rather, the dual suns of New Alexandria's orbiting system, dipped low over the city's crystalline towers, casting long, prismatic shadows across the bustling skyways. Helen's private quarters perched atop. The Helios Tower offered a panoramic view of the city below, but she barely glanced at the sprawling metropolis. Her mind was occupied with far more delicate matters: strategy, perception, and, unexpectedly, curiosity about the humans who so willingly fell under her influence. Today's gathering was less formal, more clandestine, an invitation-only dinner for selected elites. Helen knew that alliances, both overt and hidden, were forged in moments like these. The council members she had observed the previous night would be present, alongside influential entrepreneurs, scholars, and a few daring adventurers, those who had carved their own power rather than inheriting it. She arrived with a subtle elegance, crimson hair braided loosely, yet with impeccable precision, the metallic threads catching the fading sunlight. Her green eyes scanned the room, registering reactions even before anyone spoke. Each gesture she made was soft, yet it commanded attention. A polite nod, a gentle laugh, a tilt of her head, small signals that carried weight. Damien Cross was waiting at the far end of the grand dining hall. The corners of his mouth lifted in a faint, almost imperceptible smirk as he observed her approach. Helen, in turn, allowed a slow, deliberate glance in his direction, a subtle acknowledgment that neither of them had yet fully revealed their hand. Seated near the center, Leora Valen could barely hide her fascination. Helen's aura of controlled power seemed to ripple through the air, bending conversations around her as if by invisible threads. Yet what intrigued Leora most was not the social manipulation itself. It was the precision, the subtle artistry with which Helen executed each move. Helen began with a careful approach, joining a conversation between two influential council members. One, an entrepreneur named Varric, attempted to impress her with tales of his technological innovations. Helen listened, tilting her head slightly, her expression softening as she offered just enough praise to put him at ease. Then, in a single sentence, she reoriented the discussion in a way that revealed hidden tensions between the two men, exposing their competitive natures without confrontation. Varric's jaw tightened, but he smiled politely, unaware he had been deftly manipulated. Helen excused herself with the faintest of bows, moving through the room like a current that shaped the water around it. It was during this careful navigation that she finally encountered Chris. He stood near the balcony, gazing at the distant horizon with quiet intensity. Unlike the others, he was not dazzled by status, power, or sophistication. His eyes, deep and thoughtful, betrayed a curiosity about Helen that no one else had yet dared to express. Their introduction was almost casual, yet charged. Helen extended a delicate hand, and Chris, aware of the attention, took it without hesitation. "I've been waiting for a chance to speak with you," he said, voice steady but not loud. "And I, for someone unafraid to look beyond appearances," Helen replied, her tone laced with intrigue. Their hands lingered briefly, a subtle spark of recognition passing between them, a signal that they understood more than the others in the room could even guess. As the evening progressed, Helen began, planting seeds, alliances that would be useful, subtle flares of charm that would leave a lasting impression. But beneath the careful orchestration, a private battle was unfolding. Her feelings toward Chris, dangerous and intoxicating, were becoming harder to conceal, and she could sense Damien's growing awareness of this unspoken connection, a tension that promised both complication and opportunity. By the night's end, the dinner had achieved more than social bonding. Helen had maneuvered herself into positions of influence, subtly aligned with key figures, and most importantly, had established the first sparks of a hidden romance, an element she knew would be as potent a tool as her alien charisma. As she stepped out onto the balcony afterward, the city glowing beneath her like a lattice of stars, she allowed herself a rare, private smile. The game was far from over. But Helen, with all her grace, intelligence, and subtle allure, was already ahead of most players, and the most dangerous challenges were yet to come. The dawn over New Alexandria was painted in hues of deep violet and burning gold, the twin suns cresting the horizon as if signaling the city's awakening, and Helen's next move. Her quarters overlooked the sprawling metropolis, but Helen's mind was elsewhere. Nights of observation, study, and subtle manipulation had given her insight, yet new challenges were emerging. The threads of attraction and influence she had woven were beginning to intersect in ways both thrilling and perilous. Helen's crimson hair gleamed in the morning light as she adjusted her attire, a gown of flowing metallic fabric that shifted, with every movement reflecting both authority and elegance. Her emerald eyes, keen and alert, scanned the city below, calculating, anticipating, and observing potential obstacles. Today she would meet the council members for a critical summit, and she knew that appearances, words, and subtle gestures could determine alliances or betrayals. Damien Cross arrived first, leaning against the gleaming balcony of her quarters. His expression, controlled yet undeniably tense, mirrored the complex web of fascination and irritation that Helen had cultivated. "You move through the city like a force of nature," he remarked, voice low, carrying a hint of admiration and warning. "I've never seen anyone command so much attention without raising a single hand in anger." Helen's smile was subtle, enigmatic, a combination of warmth and challenge. "And yet you watch so closely, Damien. Curiosity can be dangerous, don't you think?" He smirked, his gaze sharp. "Dangerous? Perhaps. But alluring as well." Before their exchange could deepen, Chris entered, his presence calm but striking. Unlike Damien, Chris carried no pretense, no obligation to impress. His curiosity about Helen was genuine, and that made him unpredictable, a trait Helen both feared and found compelling. "Good morning," Chris said simply, his green eyes locking with Helen's. A spark of recognition passed between them, a private acknowledgment amidst a room of public expectation. The summit itself was tense, a gathering of influential figures, both human and alien. Discussions of interstellar trade, technological exchanges, and political protocols filled the chamber. Helen listened carefully, her alien intellect absorbing every detail, noting alliances, rivalries, and subtle power shifts. When appropriate, she offered guidance and insight, her words soft but irresistible, redirecting discussions and diffusing disputes without overt confrontation. Yet beneath the surface, the social game intensified. Damien observed Chris with growing unease, sensing the unspoken connection between the two. A subtle storm of jealousy and competition brewed, yet Helen remained entirely in control, aware of every glance, every tension-laden word. After the formal meeting, Helen guided Chris through the city's private aerial gardens, a series of floating terraces suspended above the metropolis, bathed in soft light and drifting mist. Here, their conversation was intimate, free from the eyes of politicians and elites. "You're unlike anyone I've ever met," Chris said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Your presence. It changes the way people see themselves, the way they see the world." Helen laughed softly, a sound both melodic and deliberate. "And yet, you don't fear it. Most would bend or break under such scrutiny, but you observe quietly, without pretense. That is rare." A subtle closeness grew between them as they walked along the terraces, their hands brushing occasionally, the sparks of attraction both thrilling and dangerous. Helen knew that this burgeoning connection could be her most powerful tool, or her most vulnerable weakness. By the time they returned to the city's central hub, Helen had already begun weaving the next layer of intrigue. Political alliances, subtle rivalries, and the delicate dance of human desire were her domain. Every glance, every whispered word, every carefully calculated move ensured that she remained not only a figure of fascination, but a queen of influence in a city unprepared for her power. As night fell, the city's lights shimmered below like a sea of stars, and Helen stood on her balcony, crimson hair catching the last rays of sun. The game was far from over, but the players had begun to reveal themselves, Damien, Chris, Leora, all. Threads in a tapestry, Helen was weaving with precision and intent. And somewhere deep within she allowed herself a rare thrill of anticipation. The dance of desire and danger had only just begun. The city of New Alexandria never truly slept. Even under the dim glow of its twin moons, streets and skyways hummed, with movement as citizens and visitors, human and alien alike, moved through the bustling metropolis, oblivious to the intricate webs of power being woven above them. Helen, perched atop the Helios Tower, could see it all, every shadow and every flicker of light. Yet her emerald eyes were focused inward on the complications her charm and influence had begun to draw. Earlier in the day, Helen had received a discreet message, a simple holographic projection shimmering in midair, a message from an anonymous source. "Not all who smile are allies." Watch your back. The sender was unknown, and the warning both unnerved and intrigued her. In the complex dance of New Alexandria's elite, danger often came from where least expected, and Helen knew the subtle signs of betrayal. Her first encounter that evening was with Damian Cross. He appeared outside her quarters, his posture tense, but his eyes full of unspoken questions. "Someone's already trying to manipulate you," he said bluntly. "I don't know who, but they're clever and they're dangerous." Helen's lips curved into a small, enigmatic smile. "Do you trust me, Damian, or do you only trust the danger you perceive?" He frowned, leaning closer, intrigued despite himself. "A little of both. But I've seen what you can do, Helen. You're not just charming, you're strategic, calculating." Before Helen could respond, a ripple of tension swept through the city below. The skyways lit up with alerts. A council member's hovercraft had been sabotaged, nearly crashing in a public plaza. Rumors spread instantly through the digital networks. Someone had attacked the city's political infrastructure. Helen's mind raced. She recognized the precision of the strike. Subtle, almost invisible, yet impactful. The timing was suspiciously close to her recent movements at the summit and dinner gala. Chris appeared at her side, calm yet concerned. "Do you think this is related to you?" he asked quietly. His gaze was steady, unwavering, unlike the scattered panic rippling through the city. Helen nodded slightly. "It is, and it's clever. Whoever it is, they know my influence. They want to test me, or unseat me." The rest of the evening became a delicate balancing act. Helen moved through the upper levels of Helios Tower, meeting with key council members under the guise of routine diplomatic discussions. Every conversation was carefully measured, every word crafted to probe loyalties, to reveal hidden intentions. She discovered subtle fractures among those she had assumed were allies, and, more importantly, she identified the first signs of a deliberate plot against her. It was Damian who noticed it first. A seemingly innocuous remark from a trusted aide, a hesitation in speech, a slight avoidance of eye contact. "They're closer than we thought," he whispered. Helen's fingers brushed lightly against the edge of her hollow table, sending a quiet signal through the network of allies she had subtly positioned. By the end of the night, she had gathered enough information to identify the initial traitors. A small but dangerous faction seeking to manipulate her rise, exploiting both her charm and the city's fascination with her alien presence. But betrayal alone could not unsettle her. Helen allowed herself a private, knowing smile. The game had escalated, yes, but so had her control. Her strategy was simple yet ruthless. Observe, adapt, and strike, precisely when the enemy least expected it. Later, in the quiet sanctuary of the floating garden terraces, Helen finally allowed herself a moment with Chris. The danger surrounding them made their closeness both fragile and exhilarating. "Do you ever get tired of fighting?" Chris asked, his hand brushing hers gently, a fleeting touch full of unspoken emotion. Helen's eyes met his, emerald brilliance reflecting the soft moonlight. "Never, not when the stakes are this high. And besides," she leaned closer, her voice a whisper of temptation and certainty, "I have allies I can trust, and I know who I am." As they stood together, the city sprawling endlessly below, Helen realized the truth of her own words. The danger was real, the intrigue palpable, but in every shadow and every betrayal lay opportunity. And with Chris by her side, she was prepared to claim it all. The night deepened, carrying with it the promise of secrets unveiled, alliances tested, and the first sparks of challenges that would shape the course of New Alexandria's history. The crystal corridors of Helios Tower glimmered like liquid light, casting fractured rainbows across the marble floors as Helen moved with deliberate precision. Every step she took was measured, every glance calculated. She was no longer merely observing the city's intricate social web. She was preparing to strike at its hidden currents. Tonight, the faction plotting against her would discover that subtlety could be as lethal as direct force. Damian Cross walked beside her, silent but alert. He had observed the whispers and evasive gestures of the council members for days, and he trusted Helen's judgment implicitly. Yet even he felt the tension that thickened the air like a storm approaching the horizon. "We'll confront them here," Helen murmured, voice low and commanding. "The crystal halls are neutral territory. If they make a move, we can control the outcome. And if they resist, well, they should know better than to underestimate me." The crystal halls were named for their walls, towers of translucent material mined from the upper strata of the planet's crust, strong yet ethereal. The halls refracted light, creating illusions and mirages that could disorient even the most disciplined visitor. Helen used these subtle advantages to her benefit, knowing that every glint and shadow could be manipulated to intimidate or distract. The faction emerged as expected, a trio of council aides and a mid-ranking diplomat, each carefully chosen for their ability to manipulate and undermine. They had believed themselves unseen, untouchable, shielded by the very intrigue they had sought to exploit. Helen approached, her green eyes sharp and luminous, her presence commanding. "I wondered when you would make your move," she said softly, yet with an authority that made even the bravest falter. "Do you think I cannot see what is whispered behind closed doors?" The leader, a wiry man with calculating eyes, stepped forward. "Helen, you overestimate yourself. You may charm the naive, but power is earned through influence, through manipulation, through strategy, not spectacle." Helen tilted her head slightly, a small, amused smile playing on her lips. "Spectacle?" she repeated, letting the word hang in the air. "No, influence, yes. And tonight you will understand the difference." With a subtle gesture, the light in the halls shifted, literally. Crystal walls reflected and multiplied. Helen's image, creating the illusion of a dozen Helens moving independently. The aides froze, their confidence shaken by the unexpected visual assault. Even Damian noted the precision of her manipulation, his respect deepening. Chris emerged behind Helen quietly, his presence steadying yet electrifying. Together they were a force both subtle and undeniable, an alliance of strategy and intuition. Helen's hand brushed lightly against his arm, a silent signal, a bond of shared understanding. "You underestimate her," Chris murmured, voice low, directed only at Damian, "and she will make you regret it." The confrontation escalated slowly, psychologically. Helen questioned, subtly interrogated, and exposed lies without raising her voice. By the end, the faction's bravado crumbled. They were forced to admit their duplicity, their plots laid bare by Helen's keen intellect and unwavering poise. "What now?" one whispered, eyes wide, fear and awe mingling in equal measure. Helen's gaze was calm, deliberate. "Now, you leave. You return to your duties with the understanding that deception carries consequences." Her words were simple, yet imbued with the unspoken threat that she could and would escalate if necessary. As the faction retreated, humbled and wary, Helen allowed herself a quiet exhale. Victory was not just in survival, but in maintaining control, bending the ambitions of others to her will without resorting to overt violence. Later, on the balcony, overlooking New Alexandria, Helen and Chris stood side by side, the city lights flickering like distant stars. "You handle danger like it's a game," Chris observed, his tone both teasing and admiring. Helen smiled, emerald eyes gleaming. "It is a game. One must know the rules, the players, and when to move. Tonight was only the beginning. The real challenges are yet to come." And as the wind carried the distant hum of the city below, Helen felt the exhilarating thrill of power, intrigue, and the delicate, electrifying tension of desire that no one, including herself, could predict. The twin moons of New Alexandria hung low over the city, casting a silver haze across the crystalline towers. Helen walked along the narrow floating walkways of the aerial gardens, the hum of the city below a distant pulsating heartbeat. The events of the previous night had shifted the balance of power, and she knew it. Her enemies had been subdued, at least for now, but power was never stagnant. Every glance, every whispered conversation, every subtle gesture could tilt the scales. Again, Chris followed closely, silent but perceptive. His presence had become both a comfort and a challenge. Helen's mind constantly measured the interplay of attraction and trust, desire and strategy. He moved like a shadow beside her, the warmth of his body a subtle contrast to the cool, glimmering light of the terraces. "You've changed the rules," Chris said softly, his voice carrying a mix of admiration and cautious intrigue. "No one else would have handled them like you did." Helen smiled faintly, her emerald eyes reflecting both mischief and calculation. Rules exist to be understood, then bent or broken. She brushed her fingers against his arm in a fleeting, teasing gesture, testing boundaries as much as revealing intent. Above them, the city lights shimmered like a galaxy contained within walls of glass. The political elite and alien dignitaries had begun to murmur about Helen's growing influence, but she paid them little mind. Her focus was on subtle dominion, the manipulation of perception, the bending of ambition, and increasingly the navigation of the electric tension that thrummed between Chris and Damien. Damien appeared suddenly at the far end of the terrace, the moonlight catching the sharp angles of his face. His gaze lingered on Helen, unguarded for a moment, revealing more than he intended. Helen noticed, of course. She always noticed. Her subtle tension between the two men fascinated her, the juxtaposition of calm, raw strength against quiet, steady intelligence. And she allowed herself a private thrill, knowing the power she wielded extended even into the hearts of those she trusted. "You've been busy," Damien remarked, a faint smirk curving his lips. "Controlling everyone, everywhere, like some queen of shadows." Helen tilted her head, letting her gaze sweep between the two men. "Shadows can be useful," she said softly. "They hide, they reveal. They test those who think they can walk through them unscathed." The evening passed in a subtle dance. Helen orchestrated moments of intimacy and tension, small touches, lingering glances, whispered comments that hinted at her intentions without revealing them. Chris, drawn by her intelligence and audacity, leaned closer at intervals, while Damien's restrained admiration radiated in carefully measured gestures. Each man represented a different aspect of Helen's world: passion, strategy, and loyalty. Yet even in these personal maneuvers, Helen remained vigilant. The council, the factions she had subdued, and the ever-watchful city were all players. On a stage she controlled. Every intimate exchange, every whispered confession, was also a calculated step in her broader strategy, a way to maintain influence, ensure loyalty, and, if necessary, manipulate desire to her advantage. By the night's end, the garden terraces were quiet. Chris and Damien had both left, each returning to their respective responsibilities and roles, yet Helen lingered, watching the city shimmer beneath her. The thrill of power, of influence, and of human and alien emotion intertwined, coursing through her like electricity. Alone now, Helen allowed herself a quiet, knowing smile. She had begun to understand the delicate equilibrium of her life in New Alexandria, the convergence of politics, power, and passion. Each thread, friendship, alliance, attraction, was a strand she could weave into a tapestry of control. And, though the night was still, she knew tomorrow would bring new challenges, new desires, and new opportunities to test both her influence and her heart. As the twin moons cast their silver light across her crimson hair, Helen felt the intoxicating thrill of being at the center of it all, A queen of intrigue, a master of desire, and an enigma none could truly predict. The morning light filtered through the crystalline towers, casting refracted rainbows across the streets of New Alexandria. But for Helen, the city's beauty could not mask the unease that had settled in her chest. The subtle patterns of movement, the whispered conversations she caught in passing, all hinted at unrest. She had subdued one faction, yes, but the threads of betrayal were longer, more insidious than she had anticipated. Her first hint came from a message delivered discreetly by one of her trusted aides, a holographic projection flickering into life on her private console. The words were simple, yet chilling. "Not all who smile at your victories are loyal. The shadow moves closer than you know." Helen's emerald eyes narrowed. Her first instinct was to scan the network of allies she had meticulously placed throughout the city, checking for anomalies, subtle deviations from expected behavior. Her control was not absolute, she realized. Someone had infiltrated her circle. Chris appeared quietly behind her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Trouble?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Helen turned, her gaze sharp but calm. "Yes, and it's closer than we thought. Someone within the inner circle is plotting against me, and it's no longer subtle. We need to identify them before they strike." They began their investigation immediately, moving through the upper echelons of the city's political hierarchy. Helen's mind worked like a finely tuned machine, analyzing words, gestures, even micro-expressions. Every interaction became a test, every conversation a probe. The closer they got to the truth, the more she realized how delicate her position had become. By mid-afternoon, Helen had uncovered the first piece of evidence. An aide she had trusted implicitly had been feeding information to a rival faction, compromising her recent strategic moves. The betrayal stung, not for the loss of information, but for the audacity and proximity of the traitor. When confronted, the aide's face paled. "Helen, You will not finish that sentence," Helen interrupted, her voice calm but lethal. "You underestimated me. You thought your loyalty to another faction would remain hidden. It has not." Her fingers brushed the edge of the holographic console, sending a silent alert to Chris. Together, they cornered the traitor in the crystal corridors, the fractured light creating dozens of Helen's images in the reflections, an illusion of omnipresence. The aide faltered, unable to distinguish the real Helen from the illusions, and confessed everything: plans, names, dates, and the motivations of the rival faction. Helen absorbed the information silently, her mind already plotting the countermeasures. Chris stood beside her, a reassuring presence, his hand occasionally brushing hers in fleeting, comforting contact. She was grateful for his support, but she knew this was her battlefield. She had to act with precision, subtlety, and cunning. Nightfall, Helen had orchestrated her first moves of retaliation. The rival factions' communications were subtly sabotaged, their alliances questioned, their credibility undermined. Each step was calculated to weaken their influence without revealing her hand. As the city slept under the twin moons, Helen stood atop the Helios Tower, gazing at the lights below. Betrayal had come too close for comfort, but she had turned it into opportunity. The thrill of power, the danger of deception, and the delicate tensions between her allies and rivals electrified her. Chris approached silently, his voice a whisper against the hum of the city. "Do you ever wonder if the game ever ends?" Helen's lips curved into a subtle, knowing smile. "No, Chris, the game never ends, and neither do I." In the shadows of New Alexandria, betrayal had been revealed, alliances tested, and Helen had emerged not just unscathed, but more formidable than ever. The stage was set for the next act, where intrigue, desire, and danger would collide in ways no one could anticipate. The hum of New Alexandria's energy grids pulsed through the warm night like a heartbeat, echoing across the city's crystalline towers. Helen stood at the pinnacle of Helios Tower, her crimson hair catching the ambient light, cascading over her shoulders like liquid fire. The city sprawled beneath her, gleaming, vibrant, and deceptively tranquil. Tonight, tranquility was an illusion. Reports had reached her early that evening, whispers of rebellion, an insurgent faction fueled by discontent, had begun to consolidate. Their leader, a charismatic alien diplomat named Veyron, had been stirring unrest, sowing seeds of doubt among citizens and officials alike. While their numbers were small, their ambition and cunning made them a threat Helen could not ignore. Chris joined her silently, his presence steady and unassuming. "The whispers are growing louder," he said, voice low and measured. "They won't strike openly yet, but when they do, it could spread fast." Helen's emerald eyes narrowed. "Then we strike first. Preemptive, subtle, decisive. They think they can manipulate fear and desire, but they underestimate the advantage of precision." Her plan was intricate, a blend of diplomacy, subtle intimidation, and psychological manipulation. She would meet Veyron under the pretense of negotiation. In the lunar court, a ceremonial hall suspended above the city's central plasma river. The hall's glass floor reflected the city lights below, a dizzying spectacle meant to awe, but also to disorient anyone unprepared. As she entered the hall, Veyron rose from his seat, his violet-tinted eyes gleaming with calculated charm. "Queen Helen," he said, voice smooth as liquid metal, "I've been anticipating your arrival. I hope your intentions are sincere." Helen allowed a faint, graceful smile to cross her face. "Veyron, I admire ambition, but ambition unchecked leads to chaos. I am here to understand your concerns and to ensure they align with the prosperity of New Alexandria." Veyron's smile was taut, concealing frustration. "Your words are as polished as your crown, yet words alone will not quell the tide. People are questioning loyalty, questioning leadership." Helen's voice dropped to a soft, hypnotic cadence, each word deliberate. "And yet here I stand, not because of mere title, but because I am trusted. I am chosen by the people, not by fear. You seek influence by subversion. I offer stability through understanding. Choose wisely." The negotiation was a delicate dance. Helen subtly manipulated the reflections in the glass floor, creating illusions that multiplied her presence, a psychological tactic that made her seem omnipresent. Veyron faltered, struggling to maintain composure in the shifting illusions. Chris, stationed discreetly near the ceremonial pillars, monitored security feeds and potential threats, ready to intervene without exposing Helen's vulnerabilities. The tension between action and observation mirrored the growing tension in Helen's heart, a mix of exhilaration and calculated control. Hours passed in careful dialogue, each exchange a chess move. Helen revealed weaknesses in Veyron's plan, not through confrontation but through subtle insinuation and strategic questions. By the time the meeting concluded, the insurgent leader was shaken, his confidence undermined without direct confrontation. Outside, New Alexandria continued its nightly rhythm, oblivious to the silent battle waged in the suspended court. Helen and Chris stood on the balcony afterward, the city glittering like a living jewel beneath them. "You make enemies question themselves rather than fight you," Chris remarked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Helen's gaze swept the horizon, thoughtful and commanding. "Control is not in domination, Chris. It is in shaping perception, guiding ambition, and turning threat into opportunity. Veyron will think twice before challenging me again, and if he doesn't—" Her tone held an unspoken promise, sharp and unwavering. The night was heavy with possibility, danger, and desire. A delicate web Helen navigated effortlessly. In the shadows, the city pulsed with intrigue, and she, at its heart, felt the intoxicating thrill of being both queen and strategist, of blending intellect, allure, and subtlety into a force few could resist or challenge. The morning sun glinted off the crystalline spires of New Alexandria, but Helen did not greet it with warmth. Instead, she lingered in the shadowed corridors of Helios Tower, her thoughts a tangled web of suspicion, strategy, and subtle anticipation. Despite her recent victories, both over internal traitors and the external insurgent Veyron, there was a ripple in her court, subtle yet unmistakable, a fracture she could feel in the loyalty of those closest to her. Chris entered quietly, a presence of steadiness and reassurance. "Something's wrong," he said, his eyes scanning the intricate mosaics and shifting light patterns that adorned the corridor walls. "I've noticed whispers, hesitations. Even some of your closest aides seem off." Helen's emerald eyes narrowed. "Yes, and I intend to find the source before it festers. Loyalty can be fragile, even when forged in fear or admiration. A crack can spread faster than any blade." The first sign came during a council meeting. A trusted advisor, Cale, subtly contradicted her public statements in a discussion about the city's security protocols. Helen noticed the imperceptible curl of his lip, the hesitation in his posture, and the way his gaze darted toward the other council members for support. "Interesting point, Caius," Helen said, her voice calm but edged with an unmistakable sharpness. "Yet I recall our latest intelligence reports suggesting otherwise. Perhaps we should review them together. For clarity?" Cale's hesitation deepened, the council murmuring quietly. Helen's eyes, sharp and calculating, swept the room. She could sense alliances shifting like tectonic plates beneath her feet. She would not allow doubt to fester. Not here, not now. Later, in the privacy of her chambers, Helen summoned Chris. "We must test loyalty," she said, voice low and deliberate, "not through threats, but through subtle provocations. See who falters, who whispers, and who aligns against me in secret." Chris's brow furrowed. "And if someone close to you betrays you?" Helen tilted her head, a faint, confident smile playing on her lips. "Then I will turn betrayal into advantage. Every falter, every whispered doubt can be used to consolidate power, and perhaps to test hearts as well as minds." The first test was elegant in its simplicity. Helen orchestrated a subtle misinformation campaign, a fabricated threat to the city's outer sector that only a few would be aware of. She watched reactions closely, noting who approached with genuine concern, who attempted to seize personal gain, and who hesitated to act. By nightfall, the results were clear. One aide had indeed been tempted by ambition, subtly undermining her authority in private conversations. Another, surprisingly, had remained steadfast, loyal to her vision rather than to fear or desire for advancement. Helen summoned both to her private chambers. The traitor knelt instinctively, words fumbling. "Helen, You overestimated your discretion," Helen interrupted, her voice soft but uncompromising. "You allowed temptation to cloud judgment, but mistakes can be corrected for a price." Turning to the loyal aide, Helen's smile was warm, almost maternal. "And your loyalty strengthens my hand. Remember this when others falter." Chris, standing nearby, observed quietly, understanding the delicate balance Helen maintained, blending trust, authority, and subtle fear to ensure loyalty while keeping her court functional. As the evening wore on, Helen wandered to the balcony, gazing out over the glittering city below. The fractures in her court had been identified, their potential consequences mitigated, yet she knew vigilance must remain constant. Power was a living thing, unpredictable, fluid, and dangerous. Chris joined her silently, his hand brushing against hers in a fleeting, unspoken gesture. "You make this look effortless," he said softly. Helen's emerald eyes glimmered with a mix of amusement and calculation. Effortless, perhaps, but the truth is, every smile, every glance, every whispered word is a thread I weave carefully, One misstep, one miscalculation, and the city could unravel. Beneath the twin moons rising over New Alexandria, Helen felt the intoxicating weight of responsibility and influence. Fractures had been revealed, loyalty tested, and trust measured. She was queen, strategist, and master of intrigue, and in this delicate game, the next move would be crucial. The city of New Alexandria glimmered beneath the twin moons like a jewel suspended in the void. Yet in the labyrinthine corridors of Helios Tower, Helen moved with the grace of a predator, fully aware that even the smallest misstep could be fatal. The fractures in her court were no longer whispers, they were palpable currents of tension, and tonight she intended to transform them into an advantage. Chris appeared at her side, a reassuring presence amid the looming uncertainty. "I've monitored the sectors," he said, voice low. "The rival factions are restless. If they unite, your control could be challenged in ways we've not anticipated." Helen's emerald eyes gleamed. "Then we ensure they do not unite against us. Every rival, every potential enemy, can become an instrument, if handled with subtlety and precision." Their plan was audacious: to forge an alliance with one of the city's minor but ambitious factions, the Silith Syndicate, known for their loyalty to profit rather than ideology. By offering them carefully curated incentives and the illusion of power, Helen could secure their allegiance and position herself to control both the threats and the puppet strings that guided them. The meeting took place in the Obsidian Hall, a chamber carved from dark, reflective crystal that absorbed light, creating a hypnotic, almost otherworldly ambiance. The Syndicate's leaders arrived, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, caution, and greed. Helen greeted them with a serene confidence, every movement deliberate. Her hair, a cascade of crimson, shimmered under the hall's subdued lights. Her gown, elegant and commanding, reinforced her authority without need for overt intimidation. Chris remained in the shadows, ready to intervene if subtle persuasion failed. "Leaders of the Silith Syndicate," Helen began, her voice calm yet imbued with undeniable magnetism. "You've thrived in shadows, yet even shadows require guidance. I offer you partnership, power tempered by strategy, opportunity entwined with security. Align with me, and you shall rise beyond your expectations." There was a pause. Eyes flicked between Helen and Chris, calculating risk, weighing loyalty, imagining potential gain. Finally, the Syndicate's spokesperson, a sharp-eyed figure named Kalir, spoke. "And what do you seek in return?" Kalir asked, voice smooth but cautious. Helen's smile was subtle, almost imperceptible. "Merely trust and discretion. You will act when necessary, but always with the understanding that your actions ultimately serve the stability and prosperity of New Alexandria." Negotiations were intricate, a dance of subtle influence, veiled threats and promises that carried both allure and danger. Helen revealed only what was necessary, withholding details to maintain leverage. Each word, each pause, each glance was meticulously calculated to reinforce her dominance without provoking overt hostility. By the end of the night, the alliance was forged. The Syndicate pledged loyalty, swayed not by fear but by admiration and the intoxicating possibility of influence. Helen had turned potential adversaries into instruments of her power, a master stroke of strategy and seduction of intellect. As she exited the Obsidian Hall, Chris fell into step beside her. "You've turned shadows into allies," he murmured, a mixture of awe and concern in his tone. Helen's gaze swept the city below, the lights glinting like a constellation of possibilities. "Allies are temporary," she replied, voice soft but firm, "but influence endures." The night air was electric, a mixture of danger, anticipation, and unspoken desire. In the labyrinth of intrigue, Helen had gained not just loyalty but leverage, her position strengthened, her enemies now entangled in a web they did not even recognize. Yet even as she stood there, victorious, Helen understood that power is never static. Each alliance, each move, each whispered word was a thread in a living tapestry, fragile, dynamic, and infinitely perilous. And somewhere in the darkened corners of New Alexandria, new currents of ambition and desire were already stirring, waiting for the right moment to challenge the queen who had so deftly turned betrayal into advantage. Helen smiled faintly, crimson hair glowing under the twin moons. The game was far from over. The sunless glow of New Alexandria's twin moons bathed the city in silver light, reflecting off the crystalline towers like scattered starlight. Helen stood atop the observation spire, her crimson hair a fiery streak against the cool, metallic skyline. Tonight the city was quiet, but beneath that calm currents of desire, suspicion, and ambition swirled like an unseen storm. Chris appeared at her side, silent as always, his presence grounding her. Yet tonight, even his calm demeanor could not quiet the storm within Helen. Their alliance, their mutual understanding, had always been unspoken, subtle, but the bond had grown stronger with every shared intrigue and every victory. "Are you certain the syndicate will hold?" Chris asked, his green eyes reflecting the city lights. Helen's gaze swept across New Alexandria, her mind calculating every possibility. "For now," she replied softly, "but power is a living thing, and loyalty is fragile. We cannot rely solely on allegiance. We must guide hearts, not just hands." It was then that she noticed a new ripple in the shadows, a figure moving with purpose, eyes intent and unyielding. It was Kalir, the syndicate's leader, approaching with a message that carried both weight and danger. "Queen Helen," Kalir began, bowing slightly, "there are complications. Some factions are questioning your intentions, and there are whispers about your association with Chris." Helen's emerald eyes flickered, a mixture of irritation and amusement. "Whispers can be useful tools or distractions. Which do you bring me?" Kalir hesitated, reading her expression. "Both, perhaps. Some are tempted to challenge you, motivated by envy or fear. Others are watching, fascinated by the dynamic between you and Chris." Helen's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. Fascination, envy, fear. They were all instruments she could use. But the mention of Chris, the only person she had ever truly trusted, stirred a different feeling, a tension between her desire and her duty. She had always balanced love and power, but now that balance felt precarious. Later, in the private halls of Helios Tower, Helen and Chris discussed strategy. "We must be careful," she said, her voice soft but commanding. "The court is watching. Any misstep in our relationship could be exploited by rivals." Chrissy placed a hand over hers, firm and reassuring. "We can navigate this, Helen, together. But you must admit, there is more than strategy at play now. You care for me as I care for you." Helen met his gaze, the weight of unspoken truths pressing against her heart. "I do," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But desire can be dangerous. If we are seen as weak or distracted, we risk everything we've built." Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden alert from the city's surveillance network. A minor faction had mobilized without authorization, their motives unclear. Helen's mind snapped into focus, every instinct honed by years of strategy. Desire, affection, and personal attachment could not override duty, not tonight. She straightened, crimson hair cascading over her shoulders, eyes blazing with determination. "We handle this swiftly, discreetly. No unnecessary bloodshed, no public fear, and we protect what is ours. Together." Chris nodded, the unspoken promise of loyalty and protection between them stronger than ever. Outside, the city pulsed with life and uncertainty. Helen had mastered intrigue, loyalty, and power, but now an entirely new challenge awaited: navigating the tangled web of the human heart while ruling a city that hung on her every decision. The night was alive with tension, with whispered possibilities, and with the magnetic pull of desire intertwined with duty. In the shadows, unseen forces shifted, testing the queen, the strategist, and the woman who dared to navigate both love and power in a world that could devour the unprepared. Helen inhaled deeply, the silver light casting a soft glow on her face. "We move forward," she murmured, more to herself than to Chris, "and no one, not ambition, not envy, not desire, will dictate our fate." The city of New Alexandria shimmered under the twin moons, its towers of crystal and steel casting fractured reflections across the glass avenues. Yet within the seemingly serene night, a silent threat crept through the veins of the city, a network of whispers, misdirection, and ambition that sought to undermine Helen's reign. Helen stood in the strategy chamber, a vast hall lined with glowing data panels and holographic maps of the city and its surrounding territories. Crimson hair catching the faint luminescence, her green eyes scanned every report with precision. Chris appeared beside her, his expression taut with concern. "There's unusual activity in the Southern District. Communications have been disrupted. Surveillance indicates clandestine meetings among factions we believed loyal." Helen's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "So the cracks widen, and they think I won't notice." She moved gracefully across the chamber, her voice cold and measured as she activated a holographic projection. "We'll start with subtle measures, misinformation, observation, and careful probing. No overt action until we know the extent of this betrayal." The first wave of confrontation came disguised as a routine council meeting. A senior advisor, previously steadfast, began questioning her directives with veiled criticisms, subtly sowing doubt among the other council members. Helen noted every nuance, the timing of words, the micro-expressions, the faint tremor of hesitation that betrayed concealed agendas. "Interesting insight," Helen said, voice calm yet cutting. "But I trust the data we have collected will clarify the situation. Perhaps a private review with the Intelligence Division is in order?" The advisor stammered, eyes flicking nervously toward the council, realizing too late that Helen had exposed the shadow of his deception. The council murmured quietly, allegiance visibly swaying back toward Helen's unwavering authority. Later, in the seclusion of her private chambers, Helen convened with Chris. "We must identify the architect of this descent. Someone is orchestrating these disruptions with remarkable precision, and I suspect it may not be limited to minor factions." Chris nodded. "The loyalty of your inner circle is being tested. Do you suspect someone close to you?" Helen's eyes gleamed, a mix of calculation and quiet fire. "Perhaps, but suspicion alone is a weapon. We must confirm motives before acting. Misjudgment now could fracture the very power we've fought to consolidate." As midnight approached, Helen implemented a daring plan, a controlled leak, hinting at a vulnerability in the city's outer defenses. Every faction would respond, revealing true intentions. Every movement would be noted, analyzed, and recorded. The results were immediate. Certain factions moved to exploit the supposed weakness, while others hesitated, proving loyalty or fear-driven obedience. Helen watched from the observation spire, green eyes like emerald flames, as the intricate web of intrigue unraveled before her. Chris fell into step beside her, sensing both triumph and the quiet tension that lingered. "It seems some have underestimated you," he murmured. Helen smiled faintly, a mixture of triumph and calculated detachment. "Underestimation is a tool, Chris, and tonight we've turned shadows into evidence, whispers into certainty. But the game is far from over. Whoever believes they can challenge me will soon learn. Loyalty and ambition can be manipulated, and betrayal has its price." In the silvery glow of New Alexandria, Helen felt the intoxicating duality of power, the exhilaration of mastery over intrigue, tempered by the perpetual vigilance required to maintain it. Even as her enemies moved in shadows, she had eyes everywhere, and each secret would reveal itself in time. Chris looked at her, admiration and caution intertwined in his gaze. "How do you remain so composed?" Helen's emerald eyes met his, unwavering. "Because in the end, control is more than power, it is understanding, and understanding allows me to bend even betrayal to my will." Beyond the city, in the quiet darkness, unseen eyes watched. Some envied, some plotted, and some whispered, secrets that could one day threaten the Queen of New Alexandria. But for tonight, Helen's mastery of intrigue and strategy held firm, and the city's fractured loyalties had been deftly realigned. The game continued. But in the shadows, Helen knew the next move would require not only intellect and power, but heart. The twin moons of New Alexandria hung low, casting a silvery sheen across the city, transforming its crystal towers into a labyrinth of light and shadow. Yet in the quiet of the observation spire, Helen felt a storm brewing, not in the city, but within herself. The alliances she had forged, the betrayals she had anticipated, and the webs of manipulation she had spun were all in place. But now the most delicate and unpredictable element demanded her attention, the human heart. Chris stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes reflecting both concern and admiration. "Helen," he said, voice low, "the factions are secure, the city stable, but you seem distant. What weighs on you?" Helen's green eyes, sharp and calculating as ever, softened for a moment. "I've mastered strategy, manipulation, influence, but desire cannot be commanded like the movements of a city, and tonight it calls for a choice between power and the one I care for most." She turned to him, her crimson hair cascading like fire against the silver light. "Chris, everything we've achieved has brought us here, but some will see our bond as weakness. Some will attempt to exploit it. I cannot risk my city or you on sentiment alone." Chris took a careful step closer. "And yet, it's that very bond that gives you strength. That allows you to see beyond schemes and shadows, to navigate not just politics, but people. You cannot separate the two, heart and strategy. They are intertwined." Helen's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. She could feel the truth in his words. Her power was undeniable, her intellect unassailable. But Chris reminded her that vulnerability could be a weapon, not a liability, if wielded with precision. Suddenly, an alert flickered across the observation spire's holographic displays. A minor faction had attempted a covert maneuver, testing the city's defenses without authorization. Helen's eyes narrowed. Even now, some cannot resist, challenging what they cannot understand. Chris placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Then we handle it, together." Helen nodded, her mind sharpening. Strategy and emotion were not opposing forces. They were tools in the same arsenal. She summoned her elite intelligence unit, deploying them with precision to intercept the rogue faction, using misinformation and subtle manipulation rather than brute force. By the time the moonlight touched the towers at their peak, the threat was neutralized. Not a single life lost, not a single public alarm raised. Helen had preserved the city and her heart through calculated action. Turning to Chris, she allowed herself a moment of unguarded emotion. "We've navigated intrigue, deception, and desire, and now—" She paused, eyes locking with his. "We can begin to shape the future, not just of New Alexandria, but of us." Chris smiled, the faintest hint of triumph in his gaze. "Then let the city see not just its queen, but the woman who commands with both intellect and heart." Helen laughed softly, a melodic sound that echoed through the spire. She felt the weight of power and the warmth of trust. knowing that both could coexist. For once her decisions were guided not only by necessity but by desire, and she would not shy away from either. As dawn approached, casting golden light across New Alexandria, Helen stood at the edge of the spire, crimson hair flowing, eyes alight with confidence and hope. The city below thrummed with life, loyalty, and possibility, all subtly influenced by her hand, but it was her heart that would guide the next move. The game of intrigue was never ending, but for now the queen had mastered not only the shadows of power but the brilliance of connection, and in that union lay her true strength. Helen's final thought as she watched the city awaken: power is nothing without heart, and heart is nothing without courage. Tonight, we have both. The first rays of sunlight fractured across the crystalline towers of New Alexandria, turning the city into a kaleidoscope of gold, silver, and rose-hued reflections. The twin moons had retreated, leaving the day to bear witness to Helen's ultimate triumph. A queen, a strategist, and a woman whose influence extended far beyond the mortal and alien hearts she had touched. Helen stood atop the grand spire, crimson hair cascading in the wind, her green eyes scanning the city she had forged from intrigue, diplomacy, and unyielding intellect. Every alley, every tower, every shadow bore her subtle imprint, each faction realigned, each plot unraveled, each whispered ambition quietly guided. Chris joined her silently, the connection between them as tangible as the city itself. "The city is yours," he said, voice filled with admiration yet edged with awe. "Every alliance secured, every challenge met. You've done it, Helen." She turned to him, a faint smile softening the sharp lines of her calculated demeanor. "Not just mine, Chris, ours. Power without trust is hollow. Strategy without loyalty is fragile. And hearts without courage remain unfulfilled." From below, the citizens of New Alexandria began to stir, drawn to the towers in awe. News of her mastery over both the political and emotional currents of the city had spread like wildfire. She was not just a ruler, she was a symbol, cunning yet fair, commanding yet compassionate, human yet extraordinary. A subtle shift in the city's air indicated the presence of observers, the remaining factions and hidden influencers, each calculating, each learning. Helen understood their silence. It was respect, caution, and fear blended into one, but even in this she saw opportunity. Diplomacy, charm, and influence were tools, and she wielded them with the grace of a queen and the sharpness of a tactician. Chris placed a hand on her shoulder. "And now, what comes next?" Helen's eyes sparkled with a mixture of ambition and satisfaction. "Now, we guide the future, not through fear, but through admiration, not through oppression, but through inspiration. New Alexandria will not only survive, it will thrive as a beacon of unity, intellect, and heart." Suddenly, a faint shimmer appeared above the city, a projection from the syndicate's intelligence network, showing the alliances she had secured and the factions she had subtly reoriented. Every leader, every influential figure now stood, aligned either openly or in cautious compliance. Every potential threat neutralized not by force alone, but by foresight and subtle manipulation. Helen breathed deeply, feeling the culmination of years of strategy and personal growth. The city, the people, the alliances, all in harmony, and yet, she glanced at Chris, voice softer now, more intimate. Even harmony must be maintained. Vigilance never sleeps, and neither does ambition. Chris smiled knowingly. "And together neither will we." For the first time, Helen allowed herself to fully feel the weight and the thrill of her triumph. Not just the queen who controlled the shadows of intrigue, nor the woman who mastered desire and trust, but Helen, a force of intellect, heart, and strategy, fully realized. As the sun climbed higher, illuminating the city in its brilliance, Helen raised her arms slightly, a subtle gesture of command, acknowledgement, and pride. The people below cheered, not for a figure of legend, but for a queen who had earned every ounce of devotion and respect. In that moment, Helen knew this was more than dominion. This was legacy. Every challenge faced, every plot unraveled, every risk taken, it had led to this dawn, where power and heart converged perfectly. And as the city pulsed with life, loyalty, and hope, Helen and Chris stood together, not merely rulers of New Alexandria, but guardians of its future, a future that promised intrigue, love, and the eternal dance of hearts and minds. The final thought that lingered in Helen's mind as she gazed over her city. The greatest victories are not won with force alone, but with foresight, courage, and the courage to love amidst power.